On today's episode of DataSetGo Mentors, we have Jon Morra on. He's the chief data scientist at Zefr, an ad tech company that focuses on video that's based in Los Angeles, California. We discuss his giving first trust approach to management, how he resources balances for his team, and what he looks for when he's hiring data scientists. Enjoy the show. Thanks, Jon, for being on the show. Appreciate it. If you could kind of tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and what you're doing at Zefr, that'd be awesome.
Sure. So thanks so much for having me. My name is Jon Morra, and I am the chief data scientist at Zefr. So Zefr is a contextual targeting ad tech company. And our goal is basically to reach out to brands and understand the specific types of content they want to be around, particularly video, and figure out the best videos that really amplify their message, or to actively stay away from those that really detract from what they're trying to say. So in my role, I oversee a team of 6 data scientists, and we basically figure out how to extract all the value from the customers and which videos are the best to put in which campaigns and how to keep them up to date. And that's kind of my job.
Awesome. So you're seeing a lot of data, to say the least.
We work primarily on YouTube right now. We have some integrations into Facebook, and our goal is to expand to kind of video everywhere and eventually content everywhere, not just video. To give you some ideas of scale, we know of roughly 4.5 billion videos, and our everyday working set fluctuates between, I'd say, 30 to 70 million, depending on what rules we use to kind of like cull that down to a manageable size.
Gotcha. All right, great. Well, I know you've had a good, successful, long career. I was curious, especially right now, seems like the growing trend, especially with the coronavirus, is to be working from home. So maybe you can kind of walk through what you guys had to do, kind of the discussion to say, hey, it's time to work from home now. Did you guys have something already, procedures in place, or did you kind of have to ad hoc kind of go at it and figure it out?
You know, in full disclosure, this is new to almost everyone and myself included. So, even I could not predict the onset of the coronavirus 6 months ago.
You guys don't have that algorithm?
No, we don't have that algorithm. We're working on it, for the next one, whatever it is. But what I will say is I'm fortunate that I have a couple of things going for me. One, I have a director who reports to me who's been working with me since my eHarmony days and now works for me from home full time. So he actually has direct reports himself. And this has been really advantageous because for him, it's been basically no change. I had a little bit of time working from home. I had my own startup from 2011 to 2013 where I was working from my house full time.
Sure.
So, I haven't gotten all my sea legs back yet, but I will say that like the biggest change for me has been one, keeping a solid office and office hours. I actually had to go to Best Buy today to buy new routers because the internet didn't reach everywhere in my home I needed it to. We also need to do over communicate. So basically I've taken all of my weekly one-on-ones and I'm going to make them bi-weekly. We're going to have weekly team stand-ups. We're debating with weekly happy hour. I don't know if that's going to go into effect, but just lots and lots of communication at this time and just lots of trust. Like I'm fortunate that I kind of have a relationship where I really trust all my employees. And so even if I don't hear from them for a day or two, well, that's not what I'd like. I trust that they're, working on some hard problem.
So let's go back to that weekly happy hour. Are you guys going to do a group chat or Google Hangout and just kind of grab some beers at home and just have a happy hour virtually?
So we were actually debating doing that. I think some other team at Zefr did it and said they enjoyed it. So, the nice thing is my virtual office is in my bedroom. So, if I have too many, I just literally, I'm right there.
No more Ubers needed.
No, it's very inexpensive.
That's too good. I know you mentioned trust, and I know your management style kind of, that's a huge component, especially when you get to managing a team. So maybe you could dive into kind of what's your philosophy around trust and building that with kind of your team and especially direct reports that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. So I like to think of myself, although I've gotten easier over the years, as, a decently difficult interviewer. I don't have a particularly high pass rate. And the reason is because I really want to find the right person at the right time for the right job. I know that a mishiring can be very costly. It's much more costly to not hire somebody that's good than hire somebody who's not good, which is unfortunate from, as somebody who's job seeking right now, but that's kind of how I view it. But the flip side of that is that if you do come and work for me at some point, you basically walk in from day one with lots and lots of trust. So I trust that you want to be at work. I trust that you're going to do your best. I trust that you're going to work the right amount of hours to get whatever tasks are assigned to you done in a timely fashion. I also trust that you're going to reach out and say, hey, I have a problem if something's going wrong with work or personal things or anything. And so what this really facilitates is this like great start to a working relationship when somebody comes on board. And then it's basically like all you can do is lose trust from day one. So you start with a lot of trust.
So you basically have that Gary Vaynerchuk method of I give you 100% trust, and then it's for you to keep, not kind of the old school way of you have to earn it. It's there and show me by doing and to keep it.
That's exactly right. What you do earn over time is more responsibility, right? By no means do I think you're going to show up on day one and I'm going to say, okay, design our next gen machine learning system from scratch, right? We are going to have nice kind of walkthroughs, but the whole idea is that I think that you're able to do what you say you're able to do because, we've had a long vetting process to get to the hiring point.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good strategy. I guess when somebody does come on board, what do you necessarily say or the environment you create to kind of have that open door policy for them to feel trusted? Because I know a lot of people say they want to have that kind of environment or ideally that kind of culture, but then they don't really go about kind of growing it the right way. So is there anything specific that you try to do early on to really establish that with folks that come in?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing I'll do is, my mandate is to have a very well-defined kind of intro project where it's a project that maybe somebody who's been on the team for a while could knock out in a day or two, and you might get 2 or 3 weeks to do it, right? So it's one, something that definitely adds value. Two, something that definitely has an end goal. And three is something that you can see all the way to completion by yourself, right? So that really, I think, builds a lot of confidence when you start work because I've been a new employee many times in my life, and no one feels confident the first day on a new job.
Sure.
Imposter syndrome is, I'm sure, at every level, at every job, every time. So that's definitely real. So we want to build your confidence. The other thing I do is I openly welcome criticism myself, right? I have one of the best working relationships I had. Unfortunately, he no longer works for me, his choice, not mine. He was very openly critical of ideas or processes I have, but he'd do it very respectfully and with lots of data backing. And he got promoted, right? Because, that kind of environment is awesome because I don't want to be sitting on a mountain just prescribing work to be done. I want to suggest work. And then the reason I hire smart people is for them to challenge me and say, that's a great idea. I'm going to go run with it. Or, that's not a great idea. If we do it some other way, I think it could be more effective or faster or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great strategy. I guess to me, it sounds like that really builds trust. And then in that same vein, accountability. So I guess you build trust, you give responsibility, the accountability part. I know you mentioned earlier, kind of you guys maybe going to bi-weekly now because everybody's working from home. But when you're doing those kind of weekly one-on-ones and touch bases with your team, what are you trying to emphasize and get out of those meetings? Is it more to understand where they are at from a project-based perspective, where there might be some fail-safes? What is it that you're trying to get from those one-on-one and drive more accountability?
I'll be honest, I don't need to get a lot. So I view one-on-ones as really for the lower titled employee. And that, applies to myself as well. So when I have a one-on-one with my manager, my job is to bring an agenda. Say, I want to talk about 1, 2, 3, and 4. I want to hear your opinion on this, on this. And if I show up and be like, I don't really know what to talk about, he says, great, but I'll see you next week. So when I am in the manager role, that's what I expect my employees to come with. Now, I know especially more junior employees might not have that ingrained in them yet. So, I'll have like a couple of, kind of, what do you think we could be doing it better at Zefr? Which project is working for you? Which project is not? I've seen that you haven't interacted with this person on the team for a while. Is there like something I should know about there? I'll kind of poke. But, in a more mature relationship, after somebody's worked for, 6 months, a year, I basically show up and say, what can I help you with today? And they say, this is what I want to know about. And sometimes it's project specific. Sometimes it's business health. Sometimes it's marketing, sales. I'm lucky in my position that I kind of have my hands in a lot of these different things. It's basically my job. So I can answer a lot of these questions.
Yeah, and I think that fosters your team feeling like you actually care about them and not just looking for the end result. So a lot of times I feel like managers just either try to micromanage or just not care. And I think both of those are strategies that typically folks don't want to be a part of that type of culture. So it sounds like you guys really do a good 360 to really make sure everybody's on the same page and also feels comfortable. I think a lot of times you don't feel comfortable and you kind of stay quiet, but it looks like you're okay with people speaking up as long as they can back it up with data, which makes sense.
I've had people who have done it not well. And I'll say this is like managing 101 is I give criticism in private and praise in public. So if I feel like somebody criticized me in an inappropriate way, totally one-on-one, I'll say, hey, this is what you said. This is why I don't think it was appropriate. Here's what you could do better next time. And we kind of learn together that way.
Yeah, I think a good takeaway for folks is have an action plan. I think it's great to come up with an idea or even a criticism, but having something behind that to either support your claim and or even better, a combination of support and also action items to help come to a resolution or to get to a better place, I think sometimes is missing from a lot of people. And I tend to think, and you can kind of chime in here, when that's missing, you as a manager, you're kind of left with, well, do you want me to figure this out for you? And I guess that could be part of your responsibility, but it's so much better when it's a team effort and somebody comes with a solution. Do you agree with that?
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I actually tell all of my directs and anyone else I happen to mentor at the time that when there's a problem, you should not go to your manager. I don't even think you should go to your manager with a problem and a solution. I think you should go to your manager with a problem, multiple solutions, and an opinion about why one is best, right? Because in that regard, your manager, if they're having a bad day or not paying attention, can just be like, yeah, do whatever you want. And like, great, I'll do whatever I want, right? I already have an opinion. But if they want to have, if there needs to be more of a discussion, you already have a point of view and you've already presented the whole universe. It just makes the focus be on, okay, the problem exists. We don't need to focus on that. There is a bunch of solutions and I've presented my case. I just found that that's such a better way to have a discussion.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, what do they say? There's no stupid questions. And I think a lot of times just the brainstorming and bringing different ideas leads to even better ideas. So kind of bringing more to the table definitely, I think, will yield better results. Your team, I'm assuming at times, obviously not wanting to, but they kind of maybe get overworked or feel like you gotta get that sense, you just kind of feel like, hey, you know what? Everybody's not kind of running at 100 miles per hour in the right direction. I mean, when you kind of get that sense, what do you tend to do, or what are any tips that you have to kind of re-energize, refocus your team whenever either they're getting overworked or you kind of feel like maybe, they're kind of veering off in the wrong direction?
So one of my favorite tools is public speaking. Right? And I know that may seem a little tangential, but the reason I like it is because it forces you to really codify an idea into a digestible piece of information. So I will have people do presentations to just the group. I'll have people do presentations to the tech org. I'll have people do public presentations. I recently had somebody come with me and speak at UCLA. I host a meetup group that I've had people speak at. And I really like public speaking for these things because of the forcing function. It forces you to think about it, forces you to defend your position. And I've had times before and I said, can you prepare a 10-minute presentation about why you want to do X, Y, Z? And they come back and be like, I can't. And I'll be like, well, I think we've kind of solved our problem. And if you can't defend it in a public forum, then maybe it's not the right thing to do.
And you find by, I guess, challenging their desires, that kind of re-energizes them and gets them kind of to come back with a little bit more focus and kind of zest to get what they're looking to get accomplished.
That's exactly right. Because if you do invest the time to do this, you are going to defend it. And even like if I were to push back on you, like the goal is for you to push back on me as your manager and say, no, Jon, you're wrong. And here's the evidence why you're wrong. And I mean, we did this recently where I sat down with a couple of my guys and I pushed and they kind of couldn't defend the project and why they were doing it a certain way. And as a result, we pivoted. And I'm not even necessarily upset because we did it early in the process and it made them realize that the way they were thinking about it probably wasn't right. And this is just advantageous for everyone because there's no hurt feelings and it's good for the business because we're working on something that's kind of more meaningful.
I'd rather fail quickly and find a new path that could be maybe a little bit better a lot quicker. So I agree with
Of
that.
course. Yeah.
So I guess something else that maybe comes to mind is you guys have different projects that come to the slate. How do you go about making sure the team is resourced accurately, appropriately, that there's a good balance where you're not too heavy on one side of the house versus another? I mean, what do you typically go through your process to make sure kind of everything's checked and ready to rock?
Yeah. So basically, we have, like any engineering org, kind of a force rank. So I work very closely with product to make sure I basically act as more or less a data product person when I'm in tech, when I'm working with other tech people and say, a combination of this is possible and this is how long it'll take. And then because of my interactions with sales and marketing, I can understand the value to the business of certain endeavors we may undergo. I'll give you an idea. We recently discovered through our own custom embeddings that we've learned a multilingual representation of video, which is really powerful because it allows us to, sell our contextual targeting solution all over the world potentially. And this could be game changing to the value of the company as a whole, right? And so when you compare that to kind of a project that says, hey, our retraining pipeline is a little fragile under certain conditions, should we address it? I could basically help make the call as to force rank what's more important. And then this is really kind of my job, is just to establish a force rank and then try and have everyone swarm. I'll tell you the hardest part of this is that data scientists' talents are usually very diverse, which could be really, really good if you have a lot of projects to work on. But in a swarming, kind of system can be challenging sometimes because, it might be, hey, our training mechanism needs help. Well, that's a heavy engineering task. And if you are more research focused, maybe you're not equipped to do that. So we have to figure out what's the next highest priority task that is a research task that maybe you would excel on. So figure out that right balance between swarming and also keeping everyone on track for what they're best at it's a balancing act.
And is that a skill that you've acquired over time, or you just kind of had to train it?
Sometimes painfully, like definitely.
Oh man. So I guess a question to follow up on that. Do you feel like that's maybe one of the toughest leadership skills that you personally have had to kind of develop along the way? Or for you, what's been most difficult in a leadership skill that you've had to develop along the way?
So probably not the toughest. I'd say a hard one. I'd say the toughest is common amongst other people that I've talked to in this role, which is letting go. I was a pretty good developer back in the day. I have a doctorate in machine learning. Like I've done a lot of stuff. And as a result, I'm very opinionated about how to do things. I'm opinionated about what frameworks we use, what languages we use, what, machine learning libraries we use, how do we measure it, all these kinds of things, which ironically is exactly what I want when I'm hiring an individual contributor. I want strong opinions about these things. But as a leader, they're not as good. In fact, they can be detrimental because if I impose my own biases, like I like language one more than language two, and I mandate it, all of a sudden somebody appears who's an expert in language two, and I can't hire them, right? And this is bad for the team, potentially. So that's probably the hardest thing, is learning when I should be hands off and say, okay, we use light GBM. I've read about it in a blog article, and other than that, never touched it. I would never use it, but go ahead, versus coming down and being like, I really think you should do, this instead. Finding out that balance of when to let go. That's the hardest thing.
And you feel like your ego is definitely tied to maybe wanting to do it your way and also maybe having had best practices doing it that way. When somebody comes to the table and maybe has a different idea, obviously it sounds like you want them to substantiate it and kind of bring the data and everything else. What component of you gives you that confidence to say, hey, let's try it out? I think a lot of people would probably say, you know what, why don't we go with my way? But what kind of gives you that, let's go your way? And then secondly, what are you doing to manage when maybe option number two was, hey, you know what, maybe that way is not the best way? I mean, what's your kind of touch base to make sure that another way is definitely the right way?
Yeah. So again, I'll call back to what I said before. Public defending is great because again, let's take the light GBM example. We use gradient boosting machines as our base learner. If you want to defend that versus cat boost or scikit-learn's boost, these are all different boosting implementations. The hope is that somebody else on the team, myself included in this instance, would say, hey, I prefer cat boost versus light GBM. Here's why I like cat boost. And the presenter could say, here's why light GBM is better. And here's my own experience to say why it's better, or not. In which case we've, again, collectively decided one way or another. So figuring that out, I really like to do this in a public forum. Nevertheless, there are certain times when I'll let people go down paths, especially those who have a lot of confidence, have worked with me for a long time, to make some what I would think are mistakes in order to be proven wrong. Because I love being proven wrong, because it means that we gained more than I could have provided by myself. Again, it's a balancing act to see how far down paths we want to go. And as long as everything's done publicly and in the open with good data, the whole idea is that we fail and succeed together. So if something doesn't work, it's everyone had an input, we decided to go this way and it didn't work. And in a research org, that happens all the time. I always tell my guys, I would never judge you by successful experiments. I will judge you by experiments run, right? Because you want to do a lot of experiments, but I cannot mandate that 1 out of every 10 experiments has to work. And that's not reasonable because I have no idea what's going to work, right? That's what being a researcher is.
Exactly. No, that makes sense. Yeah, I know you mentioned kind of doing maybe a virtual kind of team building happy hour. Is there anything that you look to do kind of consistently or maybe quarterly or anything like that to foster better team dynamics and growth just as, people enjoying who they're working with?
Yeah, so we certainly have some team outings. I have an entertaining budget that we use to go out, at least once a quarter. We've done, well, what did we do last time? I think we went to a Dodger game. We've done a ropes course. We've done other like kind of traditional team building things. But the other thing that I really encourage is the other engineering managers and product leads to take the individual data scientists out. So it's not uncommon for a data scientist to be more or less embedded in a product squad for a little bit. And I actually want to foster that relationship, maybe even more temporarily than with other data scientists. Because I know that when data scientists get very insular, we can speak a different language, we can move at different paces, we can have lots of times where every 2 weeks during sprint presentations, we have nothing to say because all we did was fail experiments all week, right? Or 2 weeks. And if I can embed it, then we'll develop more healthy relationships throughout the whole org. And so that's really something that I strive to do.
Yeah, especially if you guys have different business units and different stakeholders. I think understanding kind of what they do and kind of knowing who they are outside of work a little bit kind of allows you to go back to them if you have more research questions or more data points you're trying to get to them. If you kind of know them a little bit, hopefully they'll be a little bit nicer when you go bug them again, right?
That is very much so true because I do bug them sometimes.
Oh man. All right. Very cool. Very cool. I guess something that I think is always important, and I think interesting that you noted kind of you like data scientists that are strong, opinionated. I would think there's other managers out there that don't necessarily like those types of folks on their team. But having said that, outside of that, what are you looking for when you are hiring? Are you looking just at, technical chops? I mean, kind of what's that hierarchy of they have to hit this bar first? Secondly, I know you guys have a high bar and you personally have a high bar for people that join your team, but is there something that kind of you look for initially that kind of is a differentiator or what's kind of that process for you?
So it depends on what level I'm hiring for. So most of my recent hires, especially, have been frontline individual contributors, somewhere between data scientists and senior data scientists mostly. And basically, I'm looking for technical acumen. So you definitely have to be able to do the job. So the interview will consist of at least 1 or 2 coding exercises, either algorithmic or systems design. We'll have at least a couple on machine learning tooling in particular. And this will include stuff like problem setup, because that's a big one. Like, a business person never comes to you and says, we are going to do, forecasting and we're going to predict X number of days in the future and we're going to judge ourselves by mean squared error, something like that. Like that'll never happen, right? How do you deal with somebody proposing nebulous requirements and turn it into an actual problem? And then for me, when I meet with people, I do a lot of curiosity, right? What I want to see is that you are intellectually curious. So these are questions like, do you, have any blog articles you read? Do you have any academic conferences you like to attend? Tell me about the last research paper you read and why it was cool. So the way that we foster this internally is we have like a reading group that, one of the data scientists at Zefr has decided to spearhead, which I love. And he just proposes papers every other week and we get together as a team and read them and discuss them. So this is really what I'm looking for, is basically like a basic technical acumen, machine learning acumen, and then lots of curiosity and the ability to basically understand when you're wrong, right? That's a big one too. So like sometimes I'll describe a problem that I'm currently thinking about, and I actually don't expect you to have an answer. I expect you to think with me, have a wrong answer, and recognize, hey, that doesn't make sense, and kind of pivot, because a lot of people, along with that opinionated trait, have problems coming off of an opinion. So I want to make sure that you have a balance where you can be like, this is what I think and why I think it. And when presented with evidence, you can be like, okay, I can change my opinion.
That's awesome. I think knowing kind of what you need from your team is number one. And then being able to kind of make sure your hiring process and what you're looking for matches up to that ensures or hopefully ensures that you'll kind of get to the right person sooner and also sets expectation. I think a lot of times, people get wined and dine in interviews, but then day one and the subsequent, weeks on the job are not what they were sold or what they were told. And I think kind of starting off, as you said, building that trust through the first steps in the interview process just sets the tone for the rest of the relationship, if that person gets hired.
I think so too.
Sweet. I was going to ask you, I know when you started off at eHarmony, you're a principal machine learning engineer. You ended up moving up there, becoming a director. When you went into that position, were you kind of like, I really want to move into management? Or would you just like, hey, I'm here. It's an awesome job. I want to do my best. Like, did you kind of have that thought process of this is my end goal? Or was it just something that kind of came about and fostered as you started to work there?
So yeah, I actually started as a senior machine learning engineer. So I actually got promoted to principal and then promoted to director. Basically, when I started there, I was in a weird spot in my career. And the reason I was at a weird spot was I was coming off starting my own company that unfortunately did not make me a billion. Right. So
If only.
yeah, right. I had to go back kind of into the workforce from basically wearing every hat, everything from, technical to product to legal to HR to sales to everything. Right. And so what I wanted more than anything at that point when I first started eHarmony was job stability, right? Which obviously that could offer me. I needed job stability and I needed the ability to focus, right? So my first task at eHarmony was, hey, we have a ton of photos that we're not doing anything with. What information can you extract from the photos to help our customers find better matches?
Gotcha.
Because I had a background in image processing, so I was, qualified to do that kind of work. And basically what happened was as I looked around the org, I really enjoyed being a force multiplier, right? And this was one of the reasons I started my own company was I wanted to take an idea and get it everywhere, build a product, build something, right? And so I kind of knew that I wanted to be a manager at some point. And early on in my tenure at eHarmony, I let both my manager at the time, who was a director, and his manager, who I developed a pretty good relationship with, know that. Not, inappropriately, just like, hey guys, I really, want to grow here. I'd like to, have this role at some point. How do I get there? That kind of stuff, asking questions. Fortuitously for me, I was upset at the time, but looking back, it was fortuitous. My manager left and I basically went to his manager and said, I really think I could do this. I think I'm ready for this role. I was there for a year and a half, 2 years maybe at this point. And I was like, here's why I think I could do it. And by the way, I'm a safer bet than hiring somebody else because you know me. And he said yes. And so that's kind of how that happened.
Yeah. Well, the reason I bring that up is I know there's a lot of folks that have a startup, doesn't always go the way they want to, and they got to go back to an IC role. So it sounds like for you, the transition back to being an IC still came with a good focus. And also it goes back to, I think, kind of your just one of your ethos sounds like it's being honest and trustworthy and saying, hey, this is what I really want to do. But also when the opportunity presented itself, bringing up again, data points, factual evidence to say, look, in selling yourself based on that. And I think a lot of times people struggle when they've had their own company to go back to an IC role. It's difficult, right? Being your own boss is way different than having a boss. So I think that's a good point for people to recognize that take those risks when they present themselves. But if you got to go back with the right mindset and a fresh mindset and really kind of be honest about what you're hoping to aspire with whoever is your direct reporter or their boss or whatever the case is.
Very much so. I would agree. There's a lot of good things for working with other people. I spent years talking to myself I don't mean that in a bad way. Like that's what working for yourself is like I go out and go on walks and talk to myself and try and figure stuff out. Now I have other people to talk to.
Yeah, it's good to bounce ideas off of
Yeah.
your other people other than yourself. You start going crazy listening to your own thoughts. I've been there, so I totally sympathize with that. Very interesting. I was going to say maybe a good closing question for you is there something that you think maybe looking back at your career, something that you think, hey, if I could go back and do this a little bit better, or a piece of advice that you think you would have wished you had the John 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago? Is there something there that you think might be interesting for people to learn from?
My only regret, I would say, professional regret, we'll
Sure.
leave the personal stuff aside. Professional regret is that I started my own company at the wrong time. right? So, and I say that because I was, what was I, 25, 26 at the time I started my own company. And I was just in this spot where I'm like, okay, there's a problem that presented itself. This other guy over here says it's worth a lot of money. I trust him. This other guy says he can work technically. I trust him. We're friends. Who cares how we split it up? Let's jump into this problem. And I am just going to bury my head in my computer and emerge in 3 months. And we're going to make billions of dollars.
Sure.
I was so green at the time. And I would never tell anyone not to start their own company, right? That's definitely an experience I'm glad I have. I just wish I had it under different circumstances. I wish I had done more research on the business problem. I wish I had done more research on stuff like the corporate structure. I wish I had done more research on, how easy it is. I was in healthcare. How easy is the FDA to work with? Hint, it's not. Like, I could have known all this stuff beforehand, but I was just so excited to start my own business. I'm going to be the next Google, or I'm going to be the next Oracle, or I'm going to be the next, Medtronic, which is a big, device company. And like, that's all was concerned about. And I'll just work hard and it'll happen. And I worked really hard. I probably put in more hours working for myself than for any employer. Because I would work, 12-hour days all the time, 6 days a week, easy, because I loved it.
Right.
But I wasn't set up for success.
Yeah. And it's interesting you bring that. There's a great book that if anybody out there at any point wants to be an entrepreneur, it's called The E-Myth by Michael Gerber. And I would recommend that book for anybody that's trying to start something on their own. To your point, I think data scientists are great at doing the research. And I think the excitement of starting your own business kind of gets in the way, and you forget that there's a lot of other people that have experienced that journey and might have some good tidbits that they could share. So I would wholeheartedly agree. I think doing a little bit more research with people that are in a similar field or have kind of started their own company, and kind of you can learn from their pitfalls. But that's a book that I've read and it's definitely helped along the way. But no, Jon, wanted to appreciate your time. If anybody out there has any extra follow-up questions, or if they're seeking maybe some extra tidbits, is there any way you suggest maybe people getting in touch with you, or is that through me, or what would be a suggestion?
You could either do it through you. I would say I'm not terrific on social media. Probably LinkedIn is the one I respond to the most. So you can just find me on LinkedIn and hit me up with a message. If you just tell me you listen to me on the podcast, I'll definitely respond.
Awesome. Jon, I appreciate it. Hopefully the team gets back to their regular happy hours in the next couple of weeks, and we all can get this coronavirus.
I hope so. I am not holding my breath because that's probably bad for you too.
Yeah. Wash your hands. That's the one.
Yeah, there you go.
Thanks again for your time, and thanks for everybody listening. And we'll see you again soon. Thanks.
Thank you.
Cheers.